and welcome to the SABC News Channel. My name is Liesl Wilson. As we've seen throughout the week, the passing of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu has ushered in a reflection on his life and legacy throughout the globe. Well, stay with us as we remember a champion for human rights and a defender of the marginalized.
I have to tell you, cannot keep quiet when people are penalized for something about which they can do nothing. First, gender, when women are excluded just simply and solely because they are women. But more perniciously, more ghastly is the fact that people are penalized, killed, all sorts of ghastly things happen to them simply and solely on the basis of their sexual orientation. I oppose such injustice with the same passion that I opposed apartheid.
Welcome back. We do seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties. Obviously, as we get Steve back on the line, we'll continue that conversation, perhaps as we look, reflect on the life and times of the late Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu and his plight, his fight for equality, equity and justice at large, particularly focused on the LGBTQIA plus community. Well, a champion for human rights, social justice and a crusader for peace. This is also the legacy of the late Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. Joining us now to discuss this in more depth, we are joined by the former public protector and current chair in social justice research at the University of Stellenbosch, Professor Thuli Madonsela, who of course also delivered the 5th Desmond Tutu Peace Lecture back in 2015. Prof Thuli, good evening. Thank you for joining us and thank you for perhaps making time to reflect on the life of times of the late Archbishop.
Good evening, Lisa, and good evening to the viewers. Thank you for the privilege.
Prof, in your address this year, in your lecture, you spoke about the importance of social justice at large in the pursuit of peace. And we obviously know that the late Archbishop, championed this cause fully, embodied it fully as well. Are we any closer to the ideals that he so vocally stood for?
We're not closer to the ideal that Archbishop Desmond Tutu stood for, but we have to be honest that today is better than yesterday. If you look at where South Africa was a couple of centuries ago, and even where it was 27 years ago, you will agree with me that the fact that me and you can have this conversation is progress. The fact that nobody can be discriminated directly is progress. And we do know that what he fought for, though, was the equal valuing of the worth of every human being, the respect for everyone, an end to poverty and an end to the apartheid legacy. And therefore, we're not fully there yet.
Prof, so we look at the progress that has been made, as you've alluded to. We also perhaps look at the role of religious leaders in South Africa to date and all those who perhaps occupy, high offices as well. Why did his support, matter so much as a religious leader, given the socio-political dynamics we find ourselves as a country in to date?
His support is important because the religious community influences the values of a society immensely. That's why even colonialism leveraged religion to a certain extent to accept the hierarchization of humanity. And I do believe that the role that was played by the church church in South Africa, or the religious community, particularly under the South African Council of Churches and the Catholic Bishops' Conference, is immense and immeasurable. I would like to see the church and the broader religious community take the baton and be a lot more vocal on social justice. I think all of them are vocal on corruption, but I honestly do think that we're not going to make progress on corruption if we're not prepared to make progress on social justice.
In the same breath, as we've seen throughout the week, I mean, there have been some contending views on social media about his legacy as well. I mean, do you think these are fair? Do you think, considering his contribution to the fight for equality at large, these warrant any merits at this time?
I think so. People don't go to the same side like water. At least that's what we say in isiZulu. There are things he said that other people don't like. For example, you had a clip earlier about the gay community, and during the last lecture that I gave, the last peace lecture that I gave in his honor, I mentioned that he said that if he went to heaven and he found that it was a place that was bigoted against gay and lesbian people, he would ask to be sent to the other place. And of course, that would have annoyed right-wing Christians or fundamental Christians. And of course, the issue of Israel. He stood very firm that whilst it's important for Israel to have its security concerns addressed, but what it's doing to the Palestinians is just unconscionable, and it's improper for any of us to be quiet about it. And so there are matters that he was held, he was disagreed with on. And then there's the one about Mamwini, who I valued and I cherish to this date, where he asked her to apologize. And Mamwini thought this was wrong. I think he was right, but I understand where she came from, because if somebody dies at your house, even if you personally had nothing to do with it, it's fair that you should apologize. But I understand Mamwini's approach, that she felt that being made to apologize may be tantamount to accepting accountability for what happened.
Well, as we, look at both sides of the coin and perhaps also indicators of growth, indicators of oppression, we've obviously seen that, sexual orientation oppression perhaps is multifaceted, and there have been attacks on multiple levels given our history. So in view of that, I mean, how do we begin to embody the lessons that he so vocalized and that he lived on? How do we carry on the baton that has been handed over, perhaps in the liberation of all?
I really like the way you put it, because it's really about recognizing the humanity of everyone. That's why social justice is a better quest, because it's an umbrella quest for recognizing the humanity of everyone, restituting those who have been wronged, including everyone's voice in how society is governed. And when it comes to issues of gay, lesbian, and the queer community, Archbishop Desmond Tutu's voice or message to us is we must leave judgment to God. Ours is to love every human being. Ours is to embrace the humanity of everyone. And that's Ubuntu. My beliefs are no better than yours. As long as I don't harm you. And if you think about the issue of the gay and lesbian community, honestly, they harm no one. It's a personal choice or it's a biological choice. It must be left as is. And so how do we take the baton? Embrace the notion of Ubuntu, at the center of which is justice and fairness to all.
And I mean, on the back of that, also looking at the tools we have at our disposal, perhaps the narratives and the perceptions surrounding the meanings that we've given to what certain things mean contextually, and perhaps how we can reframe that as we continue the plight of the poor as we continue the fight for equality and equity at large. But I wonder, Prof, on a more personal note, I mean, you obviously had the privilege of journeying alongside him, knowing him as well. I mean, what are some of your personal reflections about the late Archbishop in terms of his legacy? When last did you speak to him? What's been one of your fondest memories to date?
Well, I last spoke to him about a year ago when I visited him and Mam Leah at their home. And his quintessential style, he was there joyfully, despite the fact that his health was already failing. And he made a point of accompanying me and my colleague Diane Gahiza right up to the gate, and that was quintessential style, Bishop Desmond Tutu. My first interaction with him personally, at a personal level, was around 1993 or 94 or thereabout. And I went to his offices, and there he was with his bishops, the purple dress that he used to wear. And I went there with a Swedish colleague, Alan Gustafsson, and there he was insisting on serving us, making us tea, picking up our cups, and undertaking to clean them afterwards. And for me, although I was a feminist but raised as an African woman, I just struggled with the whole idea of me being the one served tea as opposed to serving tea. The instinct was to stand up and do the serving of the tea. But that was his whole approach, was the greatest among us is the one who serves, which is a quintessential reflection or ambassadorship of the values that Christ taught on this earth. And then the second time was when I delivered the first peace lecture at UWC, and there was a bunch of young people that decided to disrupt it. They called themselves Learn First, Black First, and they were later linked to Bell Pottinger, but at that stage we really didn't know what was going on. And when after that, he jokingly said to me, he understands that I have forgiven them already, because I know that they know not what they were doing, which is, of course, it's again a biblical text, but issued in a humorous way, and that was his quintessential style, humor, but serious at the same time. I would say he wanted us to forgive, but he was very clear that forgiveness does not mean you forget justice. It just means you approach justice from a position of repairing the damage or the injury, but you don't approach justice from a position of revenge or vindictiveness.
You know, Prof, you've raised an interesting point about tradition, and I wonder if we use it against the backdrop of patriarchal culture and perhaps just the religious backgrounds, you know, that seem to influence society at large, or particularly in South Africa. I mean, when we to condense his life into a few minutes is probably such an injustice. But as we reflect on his passion for equality and equity at large, where do you think that sense of justice and that passion for equality came from over the years?
Well, he said so himself when I had opportunity to talk to him, particularly that very first encounter. It came from himself experiencing being treated as less than. It came from witnessing his father being treated by as a subordinate to a young white woman. And it came from him as a teacher, suddenly being required to teach Bantu education. And it came from just many years of doing the right thing, being educated, working hard like everyone else, and yet being told that your place in society is diminished purely because of race. And he therefore had deep empathy that nobody should ever suffer a situation whereby their humanity is diminished purely because of the way life or God packaged them. And whether it's because they're gay, whether they're female, foreigner, disabled, etc. His view was Ubuntu dictates that, I treat you the way I would like to be treated. When we think about Ubuntu, we only think about the fact that it is about our interconnectedness as humanity. But there's another deeper meaning to Ubuntu, is that I am as you are too. My humanity is not greater than yours, and your humanity is not greater than mine. In addition to the fact that our humanity is interconnected and interdependent.
Prof, perhaps in conclusion, I mean, you've spoken about what his legacy entailed, and as we look, forward into this next chapter without him, perhaps leading in a different form, we've obviously seen the socio-dynamics in South Africa. Same-sex relationships are legal, but when we look at the discrimination and the violence associated or against the LGBTQIA community at large, it seems to still continue, perhaps even unabated sometimes. I wonder, how do we encompass what he stood for? How do we move on as we charter this next chapter of South Africa?
Well, that's a great question. We always say that when a great one among us, such as Bishop Tutu, has passed, our repayment of our debt of gratitude will be to take the baton and move the needle forward. But then we don't do it. I think what we need to do is honestly pull together a council of people, and at Stellenbosch University will be prepared to work with people under the Social Justice Plan, a permanent commission, People's Commission, that is looking at in what way do we remain unhealed, because the Constitution talks about healing the divisions of the past and establishing a new society. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu remained steadfast in playing his part until his last breath to build this new society that is founded on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. So let's just seize this moment and do this, but day after day, year after year. But also, let's just teach people, what does Ubuntu mean? Everyday Ubuntu. One of his granddaughters has written a book on Ubuntu. Maybe the starting point would be to make sure that every young person either gets the book or a summary of that book, so that we can live this everyday Ubuntu on an everyday basis.
Professor Thuli Madonsela, thank you for your time. Thank you for those heartfelt sentiments as well, obviously, as we reflect on the life and times of the late Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. Again, that was former public protector and current chair in social justice research at the University of Stellenbosch, Professor Thuli Madonsela, again echoing and rehashing the legacy of the late Archbishop at this time. Well, let's take a listen to some of the sentiments expressed by Professor Thuli Madonsela earlier this year during the 11th Desmond Tutu Peace Lecture.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu answered to the call to discharge the burden of privilege by speaking out for justice and freedom for all. Despite the perils of speaking truth to power, he chose to ignite and engage in uncomfortable conversations. Even after formal apartheid fell, and to the chagrin of his contemporaries that were now in government, he relentlessly lent his voice to just causes. Some of the uncomfortable truths that he dealt with are those relating to corruption and consumptive excesses of the elites in the face of persistent hunger and inequality. One of his famous pronouncements that did not go well with some of his peers was, I quote, "If I go to heaven and find a homophobic God, I will tell him I prefer the other place," close quotes. This was a quintessential demonstration of his notion of justice as justice for all and not just us. As we celebrate this giant crusader for truth, justice, and peace, we need to appreciate that inequality and poverty are not only enduring in some parts of the world, including our corner. The problem is worsening and posing a major threat to peace. It is, as Letambolo says in her song, "Not Yet Uhuru," for some, and because of our interconnectedness for all of us. This is because as long as there is injustice somewhere, there cannot be sustainable peace anywhere. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has always known that injustice and peace cannot coexist, that poverty is an injustice, and so is unequal treatment of others in a manner that diminishes their humanity just because they're different in terms of color, religion, gender, and other human attributes. He also understood and still understands the uncomfortable truth that human rights promises in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and national constitutions are promises no less than any other.
Love is universal. You don't have to tell someone love is better than hating. You don't have to believe in God to know that stealing is bad. All of God's children and their different faiths help to realize the immensity of God. No faith contains the whole truth about God, and certainly Christians don't have a corner on God. All of us belong to God. I can't for the life of me imagine that God would say, I will punish you because you are black, you should have been white. I will punish you because you are a woman, you should have been a man. I will punish you because you are a homosexual, you ought to have been heterosexual. I can't for the life of me believe that this is how God sees things.
Of course, those are just some of the heartfelt words echoed by the late Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, perhaps as he was quoted during his lifetime. But we've seen that the Arch, as he was affectionately known, has also stood on the side of marginalized groups in society, defending the rights of women, children, and the LGBTQIA plus community at large. Tutu's wrath against injustice also extended to the church, where he was one of the loud voices in support of sexual orientation and gender identity rights when many wouldn't dare. Well, to discuss this in depth, we are now joined by Steve Letsike, Executive Director of Access Chapter 2. Steve, welcome back. I do believe we've sorted out some of the technical difficulties. Let's jump straight into the conversation. I mean, we're obviously reflecting on the life and times of the late Archbishop, and he was rather vocal and openly voiced his support of equal rights for the LGBTQIA plus community, having famously even said that he'd rather go to hell than worship a homophobic God. I mean, in your opinion, how crucial was his stance on LGBTQIA plus rights in the fight against homophobia? Why did his support matter so much, particularly as a religious leader?
No, thank you so much, and really just also bringing me back online. Archbishop Desmond Tutu really embodies really a faith of action, a true peace and inclusivity. And why this is important, Archbishop showed up and stood up, built solidarity and allyship with the LGBTI community. The large proportion of LGBTI community across the world still faces discrimination, oppression, and criminalization. 71 countries across the world still criminalizes homosexual acts, 31 of which are in Africa. We've seen the recent High Court judgment in Botswana that really have actually slammed the government appeal to wanting not to decriminalize. So he embodied faith in love, faith in action, but also faith in justice for all and liberation for all. And that for us was quite important, that he built solidarity and allyship.
Steve, we were in conversation with former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela, and she, spoke about the broader issue of social justice as well. When we, look at how deeply disturbed, the Archbishop was in the face of some of the incidents, perhaps not only facing South Africa, but as you alluded to, other African continents as well, Ghana, Uganda, Botswana, amongst many others, perhaps even extended to the world. This was not a popular stance amongst some of the countries. It was obviously also met with suspicion in some instances. But obviously it was him standing in solidarity and taking a stand. What were your observances with regards to that, his influence on the continent and the world at large?
Look, indeed, he stands, his very clear view and perspective became unpopular to many people. We've seen how he was isolated, how he was even slammed by many other religious leaders across the world. We've seen how Nigerian Anglican Bishop Emmanuel had to even say, no, he's spiritually dead. I mean, this means when you stand up for the oppressed, you're more likely to be outcasted by others who do not believe and who do not actually tolerate the truth to power that he stood up for. And we've seen it happen many times. Archbishop was never shy in terms of speaking the truth and actually dealing with the reality that many oppressed communities experience. He spoke not only for LGBTI community, he spoke for people living with HIV, he spoke for people with disabilities, he spoke for many people, including the fact that he was involved in the anti-apartheid movement and campaign as an activist. And for him as a religious leader, as a social justice activist, he continued to champion the faith in action in whatever that he really represented and touched throughout. So you're more likely to stand alone if you speak truth to power. People would rather enjoy the fake and wrongdoings, but rather not stand with those who speak truth. And so that.
Stephen, it also, goes back to, our understanding, the context of everything as well, perhaps even the narratives and perceptions associated, with the constructs we've given meaning to some of the concepts that have been put forth. And despite, same-sex relationships being legal in South Africa, I mean, we also know statistically that some of the worst cases of homophobic violence that continue to perpetuate and be found in South African society. So as we navigate these power structures that currently persist in society, as we also look at the microaggressions and even the silences that, continue to perhaps perpetuate some of those nuances, I wonder, how do we, draw parallels from what he's spoken about, what he stood for, as we charter this next chapter, take on the baton that had been handed over?
Well, we think that, many religious leaders have great lessons to learn from Archbishop, because one thing he really exposed is bigotry, that's hypocrisy within an institution that is supposed to advance peace, love, and non-judgmental for that matter. He did expose it. And I think for the fact that he used his power and his leadership, authentically so, to challenge the discourse. And I think, he refused, to be boxed in a manner that suggests who are homophobes. He refused to be judged in that manner. He actually embraced inclusivity. And that is what we believe. So I think what many leaders, many religious leaders have a challenge. It is so much that you have to fill up the shoes of Archbishop Tutu. So the lesson here is religious leaders reflecting on their role in today's era of social justice and fighting for the just manner of those who live amongst us and why coexistence matter. So I think he embodied that, and we have a responsibility to show it.
And I mean, we obviously have to continue this next chapter without him. So when we look at the power structures, the patriarchy, the patriarchal system, and even the, the religious context that some societies are also governed by in terms of framework, etc. I mean, how do we begin to unlearn, learn, and relearn some of the biases that are found in society? I mean, we obviously trying to understand how these all add to perhaps finding a solution for everyone to enjoy equity, equality, and inclusivity at large.
He was a great teacher, and I think where we have to unlearn, it's really about education. He was a very strong ally that says we must debate things that are uncomfortable. And I think that's where we need to be starting. What we have learned is law alone, the rule of law alone is not enough. And we've seen it in our own country that with a constitution that is celebrated globally, that we actually hold on to as part of the judiciary system, we need to change society's attitude. And by doing so, you need to educate more and more. You need to actually change the social behavior. And that is the crux of our society, that our own behavior that hates, that oppresses many others, people on the basis of the skin, on the basis of the sex, or even sexual orientation and gender identity. So that's where we start. But then we cannot be silent, because silence rots injustice. It runs a toll of life, and that we have seen in our country. Just in this year, 2020, we have lost 22 LGBTI people. Indeed, when Archbishop is okay and he's well, surely he would have spoken about it. Now, how many leaders in our country have spoken out against the killings of LGBTI people? And that on its own would speak of the kind of caliber of leaders we would have, because they remain silent and ignore injustice when it happens in front of them.
Well, Steve, we're going to leave the conversation there. Perhaps you want to, on a more personal note, I mean, were you privy to meeting the late Archbishop? If you did, what was a fond memory that you shared with him? What was something that perhaps you could share that just happened between the two of you that brings back some good memories?
I had an honor to meet the Archbishop twice. In the work that I do around human rights, but also around the TB and HIV work that I did. And I think it was an honor and it's a privilege that we have been borrowed such an honorable man who was amongst us to do so. And I recall in the spaces that we've shared, both in those spaces, he always had to embrace and say, speak up and never give up, even when you are oppressed. And these are the words I will remember from Archbishop, because he says you are strong and you must continue speaking up.
Steve, I want to thank you for your time. Steve Letsike, Executive Director of Access Chapter 2, joining us to discuss Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu's long history of fighting for LGBTQIA plus rights, not only limited to South Africa, but across the continent and, of course, the globe. Steve, thank you very much for making time to rehash those fond sentiments about the late Archbishop. Let's take a quick ad break, and we will continue with more news and updates on the other side as we continue to reflect on the life of times of the late Archbishop. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The body of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu will lie in state at St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town for an extra day. Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town, Thabo Makgoba, made the announcement at Tutu's Milnerton home today. Dignitaries continue to visit the home of the Arch to pay their last respects.
There is a planned procession with the body of the Arch coming down Adderley Street to his St. George's Cathedral on Friday morning. The Anglican Church says the body of the Arch will now lie in state for 2 days in order to avoid a stampede.
So the lying in state over 2 days also tries to cover the needs of those that would like to, in Sesotho, to come and say, fare thee well, Arch. And so he will lie in state from Thursday at 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. and then from also Friday at 7 a.m. till 7 p.m.
Interfaith religious leaders says he has left an indelible mark.
We feel a loss, an incredible loss, but I don't think we've begun to realize how right around this planet there are people today saying thank you to God for this man who was small in stature but had a heart which was so big and so great.
His family says they will remember him as a loving and inspirational father.
I'll remember him as a loving father. I will remember him as a father who was so happy to be hugged, to kiss, to be kissed, to laugh with his children and his grandchildren.
Those who were close to him, says Tutu, was a crusader of peace who loved his partner until the end.
You know, all the love and the hope that Arch gave to the world has been returning and giving back to the family. Mama Leah is very strong. We've been sitting with Mama Leah and she recalling all kinds of moments that they shared together.
Various dignitaries and family friends, such as Beatrice Mutsepe, visited the family to offer condolences. Thuli Joga, SABC News, Cape Town.
In Johannesburg, cleanup operations are underway in the CBD as part of preparations for the city's events to commemorate the life of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Our Mayor, Dr. Letsike, has also announced that the city will begin with processes to rename the precinct around Wonders Street after Tutu.
Wonders Street, Johannesburg CBD, housed here the colossal St. Mary's Cathedral. Designed by Sir Herbert Baker and Frank Fleming in the 20s, it was here the late Archbishop Tutu was appointed Dean of Johannesburg in 1975. This week, the historic building will host events in his memory.
We'll be working very closely with the Anglican Church, led by the Very Reverend, the Anglican Dean of Johannesburg, Father Xolani Dwati, as well as working with the Tutu family. The public are invited to lay flowers and wreaths from 9 o'clock until 6 o'clock at the cathedral. That's 6 o'clock in the evening. Evening prayer sessions will be held in the cathedral from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. from this evening until Thursday. On Wednesday, Father Dwati and I will lead a candlelight prayer session at the Tutu home in Orlando West. And on Thursday, the Diocese of Johannesburg will hold a memorial service at the St. Mary's Cathedral, the Virgin, which will include a Eucharist and tributes from the City of Johannesburg, the provincial government, the national government, as well as the church.
Prayer and evening song was central to the life of Desmond Tutu. Big time. You know, Eucharist and morning and evening prayer, that's what he used to share and said gave him the strength in order to be able to continue. And that is why we begin this week with those two solemn prayer meetings to remember him. On Wednesday, therefore, we would then at midday at 12 p.m. meet at his former home in Soweto in Vilakazi Street to actually lead together with other church leaders and our bishop what we call a midday prayer, to light candles and to also lay wreaths for those who wish to actually lay wreaths. And this service will also give an opportunity to the neighbors who have lived with Desmond Tutu in Orlando West to be part of this celebration as well, to be part of a special celebration. This one is also open, of course, for attendance to actually all.
And as the city's events get underway, the mayor has also announced that they will start the process to rename the precinct around the St. Mary's Cathedral after Tutu.
We've also received requests from the church through the Dean, Father Xolani, to consider naming this precinct the Archbishop Desmond Tutu precinct. That is something that we're seriously looking into. We believe that it would really be befitting of honoring the legacy of a man of his caliber, and we will begin the processes that are necessary to look at how that can be done.
Wonders Street will be blocked between De Villiers and Plain Streets. Residents who will be attending the prayers are advised to park at the city offices in Braamfontein, where shuttles to and from the cathedral will be provided. Mahla Kokomane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
An art exhibition with a difference went on display at the Stellenbosch University Museum in 2016, named Ubuntu Life Legacies of Love and Action. It was a collection of 30 handcrafted quilts paying tribute to Archbishop Desmond Tutu and his wife, Leah's lifelong commitment to human dignity.
carefully stitched together to create a bigger picture. The handmade quilts are reflections on the Arch and his wife. It was initiated by the Michigan State University Museum and the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. Textile artists from South Africa and North America started working on the project last year. It depicts the Tutus as an unbreakable unit, but also shows the sorrow of the horrors they fought. Above all, the exhibition speaks of love.
I think the main message that I want people to take away from this is that this exhibition pays tribute to the indelible contribution that Desmond and Leah Tutu have made in defending human rights in South Africa and globally.
Tutu has said of the project that quilting reflects the essence of human life, our interdependence, and without each other, without love, we become unstitched. In this, he said, quilting imitates ubuntu, a stitch at a time to create a beautiful, bigger picture. Mariska Botha, SABC News, Stellenbosch.
Well, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu might have been a man of serious words and led the fight against injustice the world over, but he also had an immense sense of humor that he simply couldn't contain. Well, no speech, talk or comment that the Arch made was complete without a little quip, a long story or joke that he enjoyed sharing. Our reporter Mariska Botha compiled a small selection of some of his chuckles and wisecracks.
It's a cackle like no other, boisterous, unashamed and infectious. If the Arch was not so busy fighting apartheid, spreading the message of love, forgiveness and tolerance, and being a global moral compass, he might have had a very successful career as a stand-up comedian. Perhaps with the moniker, The Cleric.
I have to tell you that you can't put a preacher in front of a podium and with a captive audience and we are looking for a modern miracle for them to speak briefly. And I usually tell people, it's an old story, but when you get to my age, repetition is the name of the game. You repeat yourself. So be nice to me. If you've heard me tell this story before, don't hurt my feelings.
No matter the gravity of the issue, the Arch would disarm his audience with his charm.
The preacher who went on for a long time, and then eventually at the end he said, "What more can I say?" And somebody in the back of the church said, "Amen."
From the everyday life of ordinary people,
at a funeral, the husband of the deceased sang this chorus very enthusiastically. And as you know, there is the line that says, "Now I am free."
to the Bible and religion.
I used to say to white South Africans, "You brought us the Bible, and now we're taking it seriously."
He would not even spare himself.
You've got one example of decrepitude. Carola, yes. Don't tell her.
even when old age set in and frailty took away the vigour, there was always time for a little something to make everyone smile.
Thank you, all of you who have agreed to be tortured by having to listen to addresses from two Tutus.
Perhaps his wife of more than 6 decades, Marleya, could rein him in. But alas, not.
Is entertain the right word. Organize is a better word. That's why I've stayed married as long as I have. I listen to what I'm told.
And Archbishop, do you feel like that first day that you saw her walking down the aisle?
She dragged me out.
The arch touched all, in some way or another. And the world will remember the moral leader, yes, but also the man of God, who enjoyed a thorough chuckle.
The very last thing Archbishop said, I'm recognized everywhere. It's not entirely the case because here some children, 3-year-olds, were shown pictures of various public figures, and they recognized Madiba instantaneously, all of them. And then they showed them a picture of the Archbishop of Cape Town, and one of the children said, that's the Pink Panther. The Pink Panther is living, and the Pink Panther is going to miss you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, that's where we leave it for you tonight. Of course, the passing of the late Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu has ushered in a reflection on his life and times. We continue to pay tribute to him here on the SABC. But for myself, Diesel Wilson, and the rest of the crew, until next time, do stay safe. It is goodbye for now.